I'd like to tell you a personal story about how I discovered what causes a political sea change. It was a sea change that led to the abolition of the ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, on the campus of Dartmouth College in 1969. And the lesson I learned about what caused that political sea change is a lesson that's been inspiring me now for 50 years to try to create or to help create a similar but much larger political sea change to remove not just ROTC from a college campus, but to remove the rich from power. So let me tell you the story. If you go back to 1969 at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, I had just graduated actually the previous year in 1968, but I was a hanger-on, an outside agitator, as you might say, for the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, which was the big student anti-war organization against the Vietnam War back then. And I was trying to strengthen the SDS chapter that I helped organize at Dartmouth College, and also I was traveling to other colleges nearby to try to get SDS chapters going there as well. So if you go back to early in the 1969 academic year at Dartmouth, you wouldn't have seen anything particularly unusual. Students were going to classes, all the normal things were happening, nothing out of the ordinary. But there were some things that were going on that were invisible. So go back, to 1968. There was, as I said, an SDS chapter that I was very, very active in, and we were doing all that we could think of to be against the war in Vietnam. Of course, we went to the big demonstrations in Washington, and we wrote anti-Vietnam War leaflets that we passed out on campus, and we tried to have dorm discussions all the time, about why the war was wrong, and a lot of people at that time, a lot of the students, it was all males, by the way, then, they supported the war. They thought it was for a good cause, defending freedom in Vietnam, and so forth. And so we had our hands full. We were doing our best to challenge the pro-war narrative. And one of the things that we did, because we couldn't think of anything better, I suppose, was we made up a sign that was about 8 feet long, 3 feet wide. It just had the letters that spelled peace. And we had the sign, it had 2 legs to hold it up. And we stood behind this sign every Wednesday at noon in the middle of campus, called the green, the green grassy area in the middle of the campus. And we stood there for about an hour behind this sign, and we'd been doing that for a couple of years. Initially, we would get people giving us the finger, but the mood of the country was becoming less pro-war, and in those years, and we started to get a little bit more positive support for our sign, but there was nothing really to write home about. And then I did something in 1968 that I'm very proud of to this day. I was one of the main people who organized one of the first what were called Vietnam teach-ins. I invited a lot of the leading anti-war personalities in the country, people who were writing for Ramparts magazine and so forth, to come to this teach-in to present the anti-war position, but I also invited the Undersecretary of State for Southeast Asian Affairs to come. And if memory serves me right, his last name was Dean, but he was not the famous John Dean, who was a Nixon co-conspirator in the Watergate years afterwards. But and this Undersecretary of State did come to give the pro-war side of the argument. And the teach-in took the form of being located in the Hopkins Center at Dartmouth, which was a place where hundreds of people could gather around in like a huge lounge, actually, with sofas and chairs and stuff, but it could fit hundreds of people. And we had a panel for the speakers with microphones for them, but we also had microphones that were designed to be on a long cord to be taken into anyone in the audience so they could speak in a microphone. And I encourage people not just to ask questions, but to say whatever they wanted to say. So it sort of could become a debate, dialogue between the audience members and anyone on the panel if they wanted. And at the time, it was the case that most of the people on campus, which was a campus of 3,000 people, almost all white and conservative. Almost all the students who came to hear the debate came to eagerly see the anti-war people be demolished. They were pro-war, and they were quite sure the government would demolish the anti-war people, and they were hoping to see that. And I knew that. But what happened was the opposite. It turns out that there were a handful of professors at Dartmouth, historians in the history department, who were expert in Southeast Asia. And when Mr. Dean from the government started giving his pro-war argument, these professors called him out for lying, outright lying. And it was quite remarkable. I mean, the government guy started quoting from a book. I think it was by a guy named Pike. My memory might be wrong on that. And one of the professors says, "Yeah, I know that author. He worked for the CIA. The CIA commissioned that book," and started explaining in detail how that was the case, and how it was just full of lies. And this went on, and I saw the faces of the Dartmouth students, and from the expression on their face, I could see that they were changing their mind about the war right on the spot. They were seeing that the war was based on lies, one lie after another, and that people who knew the truth, like these professors, were calling out these lies very effectively. And so I was very happy about the teach-in, but, you know, it ended. Everyone went back, and the next day and for the next weeks until the end of the semester, there was nothing particularly visible to see that had changed. And then in the next year, in 1969, something very interesting happened. There was a conservative society on campus, and they were extremely pro-war, and they had a little newspaper that they published, and in one issue of that newspaper, the headline called for, quote, "splatter warfare," unquote. And reading the article, you saw that what they were advocating was dropping nuclear bombs on North Vietnam. Now, that was pretty horrible. But from the perspective of myself and my friends in SDS standing behind that peace sign every Wednesday at noon, there was something even more horrible in this conservative article, and it was this. It called for a pro-war demonstration in 1 month on a Wednesday at noon at the Green, right exactly where we were going to be with our peace sign. And I remember dreading the onset of that day. I remember thinking, gee, if only I could sort of, take the time continuum and with a scissors just snip that day out so I could pass over it without having to go through it. And on the dreaded day, of course, we had to show up with our peace sign. We couldn't, run away with our tail between our legs, I approached the spot where we stood with our peace sign from a distance, and I saw a huge number of people on the Green where I was headed, and I said to myself, oh shit, this is really terrible. But then as I got a little closer, I saw something that surprised me. Yeah, there were about 50 students with pro-war signs, handmade signs. But there were 1,500 students with anti-war signs, and they formed this long line of people like a snake winding around the whole grassy area. And as I said, there were only 3,000 students in the campus, so we're talking basically half the student body coming out, making signs, and standing in an anti-war demonstration. It was amazing. We had no idea in SDS that we had the support, essentially, of the entire student body. No idea. Never even occurred to us that we had that kind of support. We thought of ourselves as this tiny minority, surrounded by people who disagreed with us. But the next day, when we had our SDS meeting to talk about this, everything had changed. Now we knew that we were the majority. And it suddenly made sense to do something that we would never have even dreamed of doing the day before, and that is to have a building takeover, to occupy the administration building, and to demand the abolition of ROTC. As I said, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, that's the organization on campus under the military that produced second lieutenants for the Vietnam War. These were the people who ordered the drafted GIs to attack the Viet Cong and to kill what became about 2 million Vietnamese peasants, and or to be killed in what became about 50,000 American casualties. So we knew we were the majority now. We had this idea of doing this building takeover that would never have occurred to us to do before, and we made plans to do it, and we did it. And we took over the building, and not surprisingly, the police came and dragged people out, and then when people who had occupied the building, about 40 students, were put in jails around New Hampshire, the student body went on strike and shut the school down. The whole school was shut down in protest of the jailing of the students and in demanding the abolition of ROTC. The faculty had an emergency meeting and voted to abolish ROTC. And then the trustees flew in from around the country for an emergency meeting because the whole school was shut down. And they decided they had no choice. They abolished ROTC, and it was abolished, and it remained abolished for 10 years. Now, what is the lesson? What caused this political sea change? As I see it, there were two things that are required to cause a political sea change, and they both happened at Dartmouth College in 1969. Number one, when it comes to a demand that goes against what the ruling class wants, and that's what I'm talking about now, people need to know that their demand is morally right. And this is what happened largely as a result of the teach-in. By the way, the government never sent anyone to any teach-in after that because they saw what a debacle it was from the government's point of view. So the first ingredient, knowing that the demand, in this case, to abolish ROTC and being against the war in Vietnam was morally right, that had been accomplished. The second thing that's needed is for people to know that they are in the majority in wanting this demand. And that had not been accomplished until the 1,500 people came out that day in demonstrating against the war. Until both of those things are in place, knowing that the demand is morally right and knowing that you're in the majority in wanting the demand, until both of those are in place, there's no political sea change. But when both of them are in place, it's explosive. And you get a political sea change like what happened at Dartmouth in 1969. I've been trying to make both of those factors be in place to have the kind of political sea change that's needed to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. And I've been working on both factors. I've been doing things to let people know that they're surrounded by people who agree with them and wanting to do that. And I've been writing, lots and lots for my website, pdrboston.org, to make it clear that the goal of removing the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor, is morally right. And one of the things that is important for something to be morally right is that it be practical, that it not be something impossible, that it would be morally wrong to devote a lot of time and energy and ask other people to make sacrifices to achieve something which is impossible to achieve, or that could never work. That would be morally wrong. So it has to be clear to people that what I call egalitarianism is not only something that seems morally right in the abstract, but very practical. And so I'm going to post various articles about this, one about what happened at Dartmouth in 1969 specifically, and other related articles that I've written with links to these articles at the bottom of this video, and I hope you will take a look at them. Also, I hope that if you haven't subscribed yet, that you will. If people keep subscribing, as many people have been, then I'll keep making these videos. Thank you very much.